Every single one of us at some point in our life is going to have the idea for a story. And in that moment, you take that idea and you snatch it from the universe and you look at it and you say, that would be the coolest book or movie or video game. And you take that idea. Now what most of the world does, what most people do is they take that idea and they say, I am so smart for thinking of that. And then they release it. And they never do anything with it. And that is a tragedy, because understand this, you are the only person in the universe who has ever existed and ever will exist who thinks exactly the way you think, who sees the world the way you see it. So when you snatch that idea from the universe, you are literally the only person in the universe who ever will have your exact idea, which means you are the only one who can write it. And if you don't, and you release it back into the universe, no one will ever pick it up again, because you're the only one who can. And in fact, the only difference between a writer and someone who doesn't write is the writer is the person who snatches that idea and says, this, I'm going to put words on paper, or I'm going to start filming it, or I'm going to start programming it, but we hold to it. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of books and what I've done with them. Let's start with Resistance. Resistance, it was a tough book because it's Holocaust. I never wanted to write about the Holocaust. I didn't want to know all the things I would have to know in order to create a Holocaust book, but at a point I knew I had to. It started on a trip to Poland a few years ago. We went to a Jewish cemetery, and there in the cemetery, it's hard even from the picture to make it clear. Ooh, that's not what we want. There we go. No signal. That is not what we want. There we go. It's hard to, right? It's blinking. I think there's a chance the cable has a short in it. All right, we might just have to back away. I think when I see this, it's usually this cable has a short. So we're gonna play with that. It's hard to make it clear from where you are getting blinks of the picture, but the gravestones were so tight together. Think about the way that books are stacked on a library shelf. And they were so tight together, but all of the books that I saw, I'm going to advance this one for while we do get to see it. No, I'm not. All right. We are working on tech issues. There we go. All right, and we're going to just back away and hope that the tech ghosts are nice. This graves marker is the one that stood out to me more than any other. And the reason it did is because if you look carefully at it, there's two things on it that make it different than everything else on it. All right, and if you're having trouble spotting it, why don't you start? Now my clicker doesn't want to respond. Very weird. Let's go. All right, hold on. Big tech issue, hold on. Oh, the button wasn't there. Now it's going. All right, let's start right here. This is the Goldberg family. This is a Jewish family in Poland. This is dad and mom right here, both who died in 1944. Then the children are listed from youngest to oldest. So here are the two youngest sons who died in 1944. Then we have the daughter Sala, who died in 1944. Then we have the oldest son, Rafal, who died in 1986. And I'm willing to bet of this family, it wasn't only the same year that they died, it was probably the same day, and probably the Nazis killed this family within seconds of each other, all of them but the oldest son. And I became curious about him, because the second thing that makes this different than anything else is Rafal Goldberg is the only one listed with two names. Right beneath it is the name Eugenis Kazmierzyk. That's a Polish Christian name. And so I looked into it. It turns out when the Nazis invaded, Rafal Goldberg was able to get false identification. He was able to change his look and his mannerisms and his accent enough to pass himself off not as a Polish Jew, but as a Polish Christian. That became the one reason he survived, and I thought, I want to know more about the story of these people who were getting the false identification, and it led me to resistance. Here's where it begins. September 1st, 1939, Germany rolls across the border into Poland. The second they crossed that border, that's the start of World War II, and they didn't come across in a little whisper. It was called a blitzkrieg, a lightning war. They were so fierce as they crossed that border, they just flattened everything in their path. The attack was so fierce, in fact, it only took Poland 25 days to surrender. Less than 1 month, and that country was German-occupied territory. And they said, all right, our capital is not going to be Warsaw, our capital will be Krakow. But at the time, 1 in every 4 people in Krakow was Jewish. And the Nazis didn't like that. So they took a neighborhood in Krakow and they said, if you are Jewish, you must live in the boundaries of this neighborhood. And then they built tall walls around the neighborhood, and then they sealed it shut. If you were Jewish and caught outside those walls, you could be arrested or shot on sight. But the problem with the ghetto they created is it was only large enough for 15,000 Jewish people. That meant 45,000 would have to leave. So who are you going to send away? Not the parents, because there's jobs in the ghettos and the parents need them, and not the children. But there was one demographic they figured they did not have to have in the ghettos. It was the teenagers. Kids just a few years older than where you are right now, kicked out into the countryside. They had no idea where to go, but gradually they remember the Drangers. Before the war, the Drangers had been their scout leaders. And so these kids would show up on their farm and ask to stay, and the Drangers would say, yes, of course, you can stay here. Well, over time, they started hearing what was happening to their families back in the ghettos. So they heard about actions and deportations and where those trains really were going. And so one night, the Drangers gather all the teenagers around them in a room, and they explain how serious the situation has become. And they explain, look, the time has come to make a choice. And know this, there's no good choice. There is no choice in which we have any chance of winning, and we have very little chance of surviving, but we have to make the choice. So option number 1, we do nothing. And if we do nothing, it is only a matter of time, and we will die here on our knees to the Nazis, or choice 2, we fight back. One by one, every teenager's hand in the room went up, and they voted to bring the war back to the Nazis. So there were jobs for the boys and jobs for the girls, but I'm going to explain specifically what the girls needed to do. Her job was to go back to the gates of that ghetto. She had to look that Nazi officer in the eye and convince him she is Polish, because on her back, she's smuggling in food and money and information and weapons. And she's got to get her way inside that ghetto and then convince her people, I am one of you, I am Jewish. Because now her job is to smuggle somebody out of the ghetto, get them to a safe house, and save their lives. Now this is not fantasy and this is not fiction, this happened. And this was done by young people just a little bit older than where you are right now. I know you saw a book trailer earlier for Resistance. I'm going to show you the book trailer that my family created for it. Okay, does that give you an idea? A little bit about it? All right. 20 years after World War II brings us to Night Divided. Awesome. It didn't start with what I knew. It started with what I didn't know. Here's how I learned about World War II in school. The teacher taught us all about the war, and then said Germany lost, then the bell rang, and it was summer. I never learned past that. For me, that was where my history education ended, the end of World War II. And that bothered me. That bothered me to have this great part of history that I really didn't know. Just what I happened to have heard in my everyday life, but I didn't know it. I was never taught it. The total of everything I knew about Germany after the war, it's right there. That's it. That's all I knew. And it bothered me because I'm the kind of person where it drives me crazy to not know something. And so I wondered what happens to this great country after it loses a world war. Well, here's what happened. In the closing days of the war, the world said, Hitler, you better surrender or we will destroy this country. He said, I will not surrender. And the world said, no, really, surrender or we will destroy this country. By the time that Germany finally surrendered, much of the country looked like this. And if this is your hometown, you don't have a home, you don't have a town. And this is not the hardest thing that happened to Germany. The world said, all right, you're largely responsible for World War I, and you're absolutely responsible for World War II. We never again wanted Germany strong enough for World War III. So Germany was broken into parts. Each of the four major allies, the four victors, took a fourth of Germany. Now, over time, Great Britain, France, and the United States said, hey, we work well together, we think alike. Let's take our 3/4 of the country, that will be one country known as West Germany. West Germany was rebuilding from the war. They were modernizing. It became a very good place to live, a free place to live. And so we said to Russia, we said, hey, would you like to work with us on running Germany? But Russia by then had become communist. Part of the philosophy of communism is destruction of the West. So Russia said no. Our 1/4 of the country, that is East Germany. East Germany was not free. They were not rebuilding from the war, and jobs were hard to find, and you could walk into a store and have money in your hands, and often there was nothing on the shelves to buy. Not only was the country divided, the capital city was divided right there. And between East and West Berlin, which meant no matter where you were in that red territory, if you could get right there into West Berlin, you would be free. And for a long time, it wasn't hard to leave. It wasn't hard. You would go into East Berlin and you'd go right to the border and look for a quiet street. Maybe nobody's watching it, no soldiers guarding it. You take your family by the hand and cross into the West. And thousands of people began to leave. So many people that East Germany was emptying out. Russia knew something had to be done. What happened, this is your grandparents' lifetime. It is the Sunday morning of August 13th, 1961, when the people awake in East Berlin. Out on the streets, they hear orders being shouted and sirens and heavy machinery. They know something has happened. So they get dressed and go down on the street to this. Let me explain this photo. These are the citizens of East Berlin, just everyday people, no different than you and I. Do you see this barbed wire fence? That was not there Saturday night. It was there Sunday morning. They literally built a prison around these people as they slept. Now, do you see the soldiers in between? That's not the enemy. That's their own soldiers. That's their own fathers and brothers and the boy who used to live down the street. And do you see which way those weapons are pointed? The message is clear. Oh, you want to leave the East? You want to try to get to freedom? If you put 1 foot out of the East, there will be real consequences. Now, over the next few years, that barbed wire fence became the Berlin Wall. I didn't think I had to study about the Berlin Wall. I thought I knew it. I thought it was one wall, and if you could just get over